Hello everybody. So just to start, I will introduce myself. So I'm Alexandre Abadi. I'm an engineer at INRIA, and I work in a service at INRIA which helps research team in their development. So today I will talk about JobLib, which is a Python package for efficient computing of what we call big data. So something that we all know here. In terms of big data, I mean data that just fits in RAM. So today it's about several gigabytes in memory on actual computers. I started to work on this project at the end of last year, so a bit more than 6 months now. And my main concern was to improve, to optimize one of the feature of JobLib, which is persistence. So mainly improve the memory usage during persistence of big objects. So then increasing or improving the size of the possibility of the size of data that one can manipulate with JobLib. So this presentation is divided in 3 parts. So maybe there are people here who don't already know JobLib. So I decided to give a small overview of JobLib and its main features. After, I will talk about 2 recent major improvements contributed during the last month to JobLib. So one is the result of my job during this month, so about the persistence of data. And the other one arrived from one contributor. It was about the parallel backends, making them customizable. And the last part is an overview of the future of JobLib, what we expect on the usage of JobLib. And this is why this presentation is entitled From Laptops to Cloud, because now you can, of course, use JobLib on your laptop, but with those 2 new improvements, it makes it possible to use it in the cloud. So what is JobLib? First, so there are those well-known features. So the first one is it addresses problems that we call embarrassingly parallel computing problems. So the idea behind this is you have a list of data, and you want to apply a function on each element of this data. You can compute them. They can be computed totally independently from each other. So this is the target of this embarrassingly parallel computing helper class, but I will describe a bit in depth in the next slide. The other main feature is what is called efficient disk caching. Yeah, in fact, so most of the time you recompute same things several times, and we want to avoid recomputation because you don't want to spend the same time multiple times to doing the same thing. There is also this fast input-output persistence, which is behind the hood of the disk caching. And this was the part where I focused my job during those 6 months. Last other point, so there is one thing about the design of JobLib and the will of the initial developer of the project, so that we all know here. So it has no dependencies, so you can use it only with what is provided by the Python standard library. But if you have NumPy installed on your computer, you can you know that it's optimized for NumPy arrays, and which is what we all use here in computer science with Python. So I think you already noticed that since the beginning of this slide, JobLib is the parallel backend used in scikit-learn. Indeed, it fits well, or I think it was developed at the beginning to better address the problems of machine learning with scikit-learn. So I give you the link of the website of JobLib if you want to have a look more in depth. So what is the parallel helper? How does it work? What is behind the hood of it? So you have here a nice picture describing the workflow of parallelization in JobLib. You see that you have a caller on the left. The idea is to pass to this caller a list of items to process in parallel. This list of items is by design what we call in Python a generator, which is consumed iteratively by the caller and sent to a dispatch queue. From this dispatch queue, you send to dispatch to a pool of workers, which does the processing independently. They return the result in the collect queue, which goes back to the caller, and you have your job done. The available backends, so behind this, are based on threading, the threading module and the multiprocessing module, which is the default. I can just give you a small description. So the threading module, it's using threads, but it has limitations due to the general interpreter lock in Python. So we recommend to use it if you know that the functions that are called on each element of your list explicitly releases this GIL. So especially like Cython-based function or things like this. So multiprocessing backend really create external processes. So it's really like a fork and duplicates the memory and duplicates the memory. So to avoid this, there are clever mechanisms behind to avoid duplicating big arrays that in memory, like using what we call memory mapping. We will see this later. Okay, so here is a small snippet taken from the examples on the website, showing. So I highlighted the line that calls this embarrassingly, that treats this embarrassingly problem using the parallel object. So here we create with n jobs, with 3 jobs. I put on purpose a high level of verbosity to have a nice output, so you can follow the progression of your jobs. The delayed function is just a trick to create a tuple from the function. So here we call the squared root. So the first element of this tuple is the object, the function object, and the other element of the tuple are the list of arguments and the dictionary of named arguments. So this is the tuple passed to each worker, and for computing element-wise your parallel job. Okay. Now a few words on caching on disk in JobLib. What is it? So it uses a memorize pattern with the memory object. So the idea is to instantiate this memory object. So I just put the example from the documentation because it's really meaningful. You pass it the directory on your hard drive where you want to store the cache. So as I said, the idea behind this is to avoid recomputation. So we can see the first time we decorate with the cache function from the of the memory object the square function. So in the second line in yellow. And the first time we call it, it's actually computed or evaluated. But the second time we call it with the same input parameters, we don't actually re-evaluate. We simply reload from disk the previous result. So for in some cases, it's faster because you know that it takes, I don't know, several hours to process a quite big data. But if you simply read it from disk, it will take a few seconds. So you have a huge performance gain. How to determine if the list of input parameters are the same as the previous call? We create JobLib, so create a hash of input parameters. This is done using this is based on the pickle module. I will give more details on the next slide. And the results are also persisted on disk using the same mechanism of pickling. So here you have the big picture. So caching on disk is based on persistence provided by JobLib as well. And this was the work where I focused the most during at the beginning of my collaboration on the project. What is persistence? The idea is to convert an arbitrary object, so of any kind. It can be a list, it can be a dictionary, it can be whatever object or custom object that you defined. It can be a NumPy array. You want to convert it to a string of bytes, and this string of bytes is written in a file on your file system. To do that, JobLib uses the pickle module by subclassing pickler and unpickler objects. So it's not super trivial to understand at the beginning, but it does the job super well. So the idea is, so pickle will analyze your object, and when it reaches an NumPy array, instead of using specific method from pickle like reduce or set state, it bypasses the default pickle mechanism by implementing its own and relying on NumPy persistence function like load and save function. So I won't go in too much into detail. I have another slide which explains what was the refactoring strategy I applied to fix it. So you see it relies on two functions. So the first one is dump, which actually convert the object to a string of bytes and write it to a file. You can see that the arbitrary object is just a list of two tuples, and the second tuple contains an NumPy array. The result file is not only one file. You have a list of files. The first one is like the main pickle file, and the second file contains the buffer of the NumPy array. So this was another limitation that I fixed in my refactoring. I will show you how this could be achieved. Third point is the compression. We want fast I/O, and sometimes we could imagine that you have a slow hard drive or network drive, or data that compress really well, because there is a lot of consecutive values which are the same, a lot of zeros. So it's faster to either compress it and write it on disk than to write it fully on the disk without compression. So JobLib provides this compression persistence using compression mechanism. It's simply another parameter in the dump function. Okay. And last point, the persistence is also able to is also useful for doing out-of-core computing with JobLib. So, it's based on the memory mapping from NumPy. You don't actually have to load the full NumPy array in memory. You can just do what we call memory mapping to access a subpart of your array. It's also used for sharing data between workers. So if you rely on the multiprocessing backend of the parallel object, this is what is used to avoid memory explosion if you have a lot of workers working at the same time. Okay, so now the second part of my presentation, I will show you the two recent major improvements in JobLib. First one is about persistence. So this is the one I know the best because I am the contributor of it. And the second part is the custom parallel backends, which was contributed by Niels Zillemaker and Olivier Grisel. Those two major improvements will arrive in the next version, in 0.10.0. Persistence refactoring. So just here to show you what was the state of JobLib when I started to work on this topic. So as you noticed before, if we had an object with multiple arrays, it was persisted in as many files as there are arrays in your object. this was making the management of cache a bit complex, because if you have a list of NumPy array, I mean, let's say 100 NumPy array in an object, it creates 101 file. It can be complex. If you want to move your cache, you can have problems of concurrency or things like this. The other thing is that only zlib compression was available, and it was difficult to propose new compression method. There are faster compression method. There are more efficient compression method available in Python, but they were not easy to use in JobLib. The last point was the memory copies when using the compression. I did a bit of benchmark on JobLib during the persistence and reload from cache. So I made a bit of benchmark of memory copies, and noticed that there were a lot of memory copies. Not a lot, but I mean 2 or 3 times the size of your NumPy arrays, and this was a huge gap. That is fixed now. So in master it's fixed, and it will release Jest in 0.10. Now all NumPy arrays are persisted in only one file, and this opens the door to really interesting usage with JobLib. The support of all compression methods provided by the Python standard library. And the most important improvement is that there are no more memory copies when compressing big objects with NumPy arrays. So you can follow the discussion on this. So be careful, because it was a long discussion with a lot of images on the GitHub pull request. So it can take a bit of time to load the page. Just a few words on the strategy applied in this refactoring. So on top here, you can see the old pickle byte stream. So in blue and green, you see, so in blue it's really what is generated by pickle. When we reach a NumPy array, instead of using the pickle process, so we create an array wrapper containing the metadata of your object, so describing the shape, the data type, and the different flags contained in your NumPy array. And this is written in the pickle stream, but the array wrapper was written in an external file. The refactoring is quite simple, as shown here, but was a bit tricky to implement. Now we interleave the buffer array between pickle stream. So it's interleaved in the pickle stream. So we can have all arrays persisted in one file. The problem is that it breaks the pickle format. So if you want to use modules like pickle tools to analyze what is in your pickle, it's no longer possible with the latest version, if your initial object has NumPy arrays. The second point is that so before the array buffer was written in an internal memory buffer. So this is where occurs the duplication of memory during persistence and reloading. So instead of doing this, the arrays are written by chunks of bytes using low-level NumPy functions, and this avoids memory copies. So let's see what was the improvement, so graphically. So here is a plot obtained using Memory Profiler, which follows the memory consumption during dump. So between the blue brackets, you can see the call to the dump function. So we instantiate an object. Here it's a list of two NumPy arrays, and the global memory usage is about 400 megabytes. So we can clearly see that there is an increase of memory which is progressive, and we double the memory during the dump process. It's a bit the same when we reload, so between the yellow brackets. If we compare it with the new result, if we compare it with the new result, you can clearly see that writing by chunks allows to limit the memory during dump. So this is a really important gain, because now you can really process. You can process bigger data, and so this was one of the main results. So here, just to show you that if we dump using compression, we dump in a single file, and this is useful for scikit-learn estimators, for instance, because often they are construct like there are a list of NumPy arrays generally, so you can persist them in only one file. So it simplifies the management of backup files, and it's also make it more robust when you use memory maps on distributed file systems, because you are sure that your files are at the same point. So if you access concurrently on a pickle file containing a lot of NumPy array. So the compression formats, as I said, we support now all compression formats provided by the Python standard library, depending on the version of, if they are available depending on the version of Python. For example, LZMA and XZ are only available after Python 3.3. We have automatic compression based on file extension. So if I want to persist to a file with a .gz, for example, it will automatically select the gzip compressor with the default compression level of 3. The automatic detection of compression formats when you reload your pickle. This is because we now use valid compression file formats. We are based on standard magic numbers. So this is detected when you open the file at the beginning. You say, okay, this is the magic number of XZ file. I call the write decompressor object internally. Generally, those compressors are slower than zlib, which is the default compression. But it was not so difficult to add. Maybe not so useful, but it shows that it's easy to extend it to other compression strategy. So you can see here just a small change in the API. So you can now, in conjunction with compress equal compression level, you can pass a tuple with the first element as the compression method and the second element the compression level of this method. The last line is equivalent to the first one because it automatically detected the extension of the pickle file. So to conclude on this persistence improvement, I wanted to show you a performance comparison between different libraries available. So the first 4 lines are comparing persistence, so dump and load, call to dump and load functions, without compression, and comparing the old version of joblib, the actual version of joblib, the pickle implementation, and the NumPy implementation. What we can see is joblib is faster without compression. NumPy is really slower, but it's because it uses an internal structure to making it possible to access sub-object in your complex object. Yeah, so I forgot to say that the test was run against the data coming from scikit-learn called labeled faces in the wild. So this is a dictionary with NumPy arrays inside. So this is what I called a real-life example. We also see that the memory consumption is huge for pickle and NumPy compared to what is available to what joblib does. And it's the same story when you use compression. So the 4 last lines, you can clearly see, and you can clearly see in orange the huge gain in terms of memory consumption with the latest version of joblib. In terms of speed, we are still faster, and it's a super nice improvement. Just a last point about the fact that it's data dependent. here I place the study in a real life use case, so with a dictionary containing NumPy arrays. But if you try with, let's say, 1 million element list or 1 million key dictionary, JobLib will be clearly slower. So I don't have a result here because I don't want to show bad things for JobLib. But this is because we subclassing the pickler and unpickler is using the Python implementation of pickle, and pickle and NumPy are using the C implementation of pickle, which is clearly faster. So I don't want to hide this result, but you have to know that if you have a list of 1 or 10 million elements, you will be clearly slower with JobLib. But this should be fixed. This is possible. This can be fixed, sorry, using a subclass of pickler from Python 3.5. It's now possible to subclass C implementation of pickle. So that's something that we could provide in the future. A few words on the parallel backends. Okay, so as I said before, we had threading and multiprocessing backends available before. It was not extensible, you only have access to those 2 backends. And the active backends cannot be changed from a high level. This means that in scikit-learn, for example, you have to add extra parameter for setting the number of jobs in your when you want to run or call a function. And this is not really handy. So now, with this new contribution, we have this common API to the parallel backend interface, and and we have this context manager. So you can change the backend in a context manager. So you place yourself in a context manager, and then each call to parallel will use this active backend. There are new backends for the distributed module, so that Olivier showed us this morning, which was implemented by Matthew Rocklin and available in distributed. There is one for IPython parallel, and there is one for Yarn, implemented by Niels Dillemaker. So this is the initial contributor of this custom parallel backend, and he did that on purpose for Hadoop Yarn. You can follow the discussion on GitHub. So I wanted to show you a bit the principle. What is the bare minimum if you want to provide your own custom backend, parallel backend, sorry. So the really minimum is to provide this configure method for setting the default number of jobs and the parallel strategy. There is this apply async method where you actually call your workers. And the second step is just to register your parallel backends with the function provided by JobLib, and that's pretty much it. Just to show you the procedure with IPython parallel, it's really easy to use for the developers now. In the IPython parallel case, you have to start your controller, which is in charge of broadcasting the jobs on engines and getting back the result from the engines. So your script connects to the controller as a client and communicate with the controller. So the controller is really like orchestrating all this. And in terms of implementation, you simply have to register JobLib. So this is a function retrieved from IPython parallel. And then you see this context manager call. So I changed the active backend to IPython parallel. Remember that by default it was multiprocessing. So then the call to parallel inside this context manager will use IPython parallel. And when you go out from this context manager, you switch back to the active backend multiprocessing. Okay, so I have a small demo. But I can show you. There is a IPython notebook and that. which is here. Okay. Yes, that's it. Okay. So I recall how to start your local cluster. This is really working locally, but with IPython Parallel, you could use a backend of like SGE or Slurm if you know how to configure it, and connect your IPython notebook to it. So I start the controller and the IP, the engines here on the terminals. Okay, let's do it. Je sais pas ce que j'ai tapé. Ah yes. Là, je vois pas. Tac. So the controller is started. Now I start my engines. Okay. So okay. You can see that on the controller that engines are connecting to the controller. Well, it's up now, but by default the notebook initially connected to the controller, so you have everything in place, and you can start your notebook. Okay, so this is the principle taken from the IPython Parallel documentation. The controller corresponds to the hub and the schedulers. The client is the notebook, and the engine is the process that I just started. So first step is about installing development version of the packages, because what I'm showing here is not available, it's not released yet. So I won't install them because I already have installed. You have to patch scikit-learn externals again. It's really a recent development, so it's not released yet. I'm really showing new things. Okay. So I'm importing the joblib from scikit-learn and I patch it with the latest version. This was a trick from Olivier, if you want to know. Okay. This example is based on the scikit-learn digits. Yes. Okay. Okay. So just to show you how. So we already had the demo this morning, so I won't give you more. Okay. So I will perform a randomized search on the support vector classifier model. You have to also know that I'm not an expert in scikit-learn, so I know the bare minimum, and I had to ask Gael to explain me what is the concept of the randomized search. So this is from a handmade draw from Gael. Thank you, Gael. So we'll see how we can compute the best model parameters to have the best cross-validation scores. Okay, using the randomized search. So I run it on one core. So this is the default call using only one core. You can see that you have a really bad best parameter score of 0.2, and it took 1 second. So now I will import the IPython Parallel backend and register it to joblib. Okay, and so it's a bit different from what I presented before. And okay, so I just do a bit more iteration, hoping that the result will be better. So normally it should take a little more time, but the overall result. So okay, so you see your jobs running in parallel, and if I display the score, I have a better cross-validation score, and I have the list of optimal parameters, and this is good. Okay. this was for this example, this small demo. So what's next? So you're getting close to the end of this presentation. So first, I highlighted the fact that now you can persist in a single file even if your object to persist contains multiple NumPy array. So this opens the door to persisting in file object. We had a request on the GitHub project, or I opened a PR for doing this. It also works with a compression file object available in the Python standard library. So here is an example of how you can use it using a context manager call. But even better, we could imagine to persist in any kind of file-like object. So, for example, a remote store object accessing a blob database or a remote store, any kind of remote storage. So this is really what opens the door to, as I said, using JobLib with cloud resources. Okay, so I wanted to add this slide just to respect the promise of the title of this presentation. So the previous slide showed that it was possible to share. We are nearly done with sharing persistent file in a storage provider, so cloud storage provider such as S3 or Google Cloud Storage, but maybe there are others that I forgot to mention here. We could also imagine using computing resources on the cloud, so with Google Cloud Platform or EC2, Spark. So Hadoop, it's already the case with the Yarn backend available. Okay. So now it's time to conclude. Just to recall what I explained until now. Remember that now JobLib is able to persist in a single file and soon in file objects. So it opens the door to a remote storage. We have those new compression formats provided by the Python standard library. But we could extend it to faster implementations. So let's say BLOSC, which contain LZ4 compression, which is super fast, or Snappy, or whatever. We persist without memory copy, even when we use compression, so for fast persistent I/O. This allows users to manipulate bigger data. And those new parallel backends available, so distributed IPython parallel, Yarn, and maybe new ones to come in a near future. So I'd like to thank Wendelin, who supports the project, but also the great team so the guys who worked with me on those projects. So Loïc, Esteve, Gaël, and Olivier, thank you very much for supporting me and review my code and all those things. And also thank you for your attention. Thank you.